It was just a solo drive to visit family, but he never made it. The rain began without warning, a sudden violent assault on the dusty windshield of the 10-year-old Honda. One moment, the setting sun was a smear of apricot and bruised purple across the vast, empty canvas of the West Texas sky. The next, the world dissolved into a churning, gray chaos. The wipers, old and brittle, shrieked in protest, smearing the water into a blurry, hypnotic mess. Leo gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He was 30 years old, driving a car he'd owned since he was 20. On a road he hadn't traveled in a decade. To see a mother he wasn't sure would recognize him. The road was a black ribbon, unfurling into nothingness. On either side, the flat, featureless plains stretched into an abyss, punctuated only by the skeletal silhouettes of pumpjacks, their heads nodding in a slow, relentless rhythm, like mechanical beasts drinking from the earth. The cell service had died an hour ago. The radio hissed with static, the ghost of a forgotten country song swallowed by the storm. He was utterly, profoundly alone. It was a feeling he'd once craved, a solitude he'd built his life around in the city. But out here, it felt different. It felt like a vulnerability. The car, his trusty metal shell, suddenly felt flimsy, a tin can in the face of the storm's indifferent rage. He leaned forward, squinting through the frantic arc of the wipers, his shoulders tight with the tension that had nothing to do with the drive and everything to do with the destination. His mother's face, the last time he'd seen her, swam in his memory, a pale, confused mask, her eyes searching for a name she couldn't find. The thought sent a familiar, cold dread coiling in his gut. That's when he saw the lights. They weren't headlights. They were a blinding, strobing pulse of red and blue, appearing from nowhere, filling his rearview mirror with a silent, screaming emergency. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. He hadn't been speeding. He'd been crawling, his foot feathering the brake as the rain intensified. He glanced at the speedometer, 45 in a 65. He hadn't done anything wrong. The thought was a useless mantra, a child's prayer against the monster. Under the bed, the lights were real. They were behind him, and they wanted him. He pulled over to the shoulder, the tires crunching on the wet gravel. The engine idled, a low, nervous hum beneath the percussive drumming of the rain on the roof. He killed the radio, plunging the car into a tense, expectant silence. In the mirror, he saw a shape emerge from the patrol car, a hulking silhouette, against the strobing glare, made monstrous and indistinct by the downpour. The figure wore a wide-brimmed hat, the rain sluicing off it in silver sheets. It moved with a slow, deliberate confidence, a predator that knew its prey was cornered. Leo's hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. He fumbled for the button to lower his window, the mechanism groaning in protest. A blast of cold, damp air filled the car, carrying the scent of wet asphalt and ozone. The figure was at his window now, leaning down. Leo couldn't see a face, just the dark, dripping brim of the hat and the glint of a badge on a tan uniform. The man was a giant, his presence eclipsing the small window, blocking out what little light remained in the dying day. Evening, the voice said. It was a low, gravelly drawl, the kind of voice that was supposed to be reassuring. The voice of local law, of a man who helps with flat tires and gives directions. But there was something else in it, a flat, cold resonance that vibrated in Leo's bones. It was the sound of absolute, unquestioned authority. Evening, officer, Leo managed, his own voice sounding thin and reedy. Was I doing something wrong? The figure was silent for a long moment, the only sounds, the rain and the rhythmic squeak of his leather gun belt. He didn't answer the question. Instead, he said, license and registration. Of course. Leo's movements were jerky, uncoordinated. He reached for the glove compartment, his fingers fumbling with the latch. The contents spilled out tolled receipts, a tire pressure gauge, a dog-eared map of a state he no longer lived in. He found the registration and his insurance card, then pulled his wallet from his back pocket. His driver's license, with its smiling, 10 years younger version of himself, felt like a relic from another life. He handed the documents out the window. A large, thick-fingered hand took them. The hand was weathered, the knuckles scarred, the nails clipped short. It was a hand that knew work, or violence. The figure held a heavy-duty flashlight, its beam cutting a perfect white circle through the rain. He examined the documents, the beam moving slowly from the license to the registration, then back again. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Leo could feel the man's unseen eyes on him, a physical weight. He felt scrutinized, judged, and found wanting before a single word of accusation had been spoken. "You're a long way from home, son," the officer said, his voice still holding that unnerving, flat calm. He tapped the license with a thick finger. "Austin, that's a big city, full of all kinds of people." "Yes, sir," Leo said. "I'm on my way to visit my mother in Oakhaven." Oakhaven, the officer repeated, the name of the small, forgotten town, sounding like a foreign word in his mouth. "Your mama sick?" The question was too personal, too intimate. It was a violation. "She's not well," Leo said, his throat tightening. The officer clicked his tongue. "That's a shame. A real shame." He shined the flashlight beam directly into Leo's face. Leo flinched, his pupils contracting into pinpricks. The light was blinding, erasing the man behind it, turning him into a disembodied voice and a burning, white sun. "You look nervous, son. You got a reason to be nervous." "No, sir, it's just the storm, and you pulled me over. I was just wondering what I did." "What you did," the officer said, his voice dropping lower. Losing the last pretense of folksy charm, is you fit a description. A cold spike of fear, sharp and clean, pierced the fog of Leo's anxiety. A description? Of what? "We had a report, Bolo, be on the lookout. Vehicle matching this description. Driver matching your description. Involved in a situation back in Odessa." The flashlight beam moved from Leo's eyes, tracing a slow path down his body, lingering on his chest, his lap. It felt like a physical touch, invasive and obscene. "A little girl," the words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. A little girl. Leo's mind reeled. He'd driven through Odessa hours ago, stopping only for gas and a stale coffee. He'd spoken to no one, he'd seen no one. "What? No. That's impossible. I haven't, I wouldn't. That's what they all say," the officer drawled. He took a step back from the window. "I'm gonna need you to step out of the vehicle. Keep your hands where I can see them." "Officer, there has to be a mistake," Leo pleaded, his voice cracking. The rain was soaking the sleeve of his shirt, the collar of his jacket. He was shivering, but not just from the cold. This wasn't happening. This was a nightmare, a surreal detour on a road already paved with dread. "The only mistake," the officer said, his voice hardening into granite, "would be for you to not do exactly as I say now. Out of the car." Leo's body moved on its own, his mind still struggling to catch up. He pushed the door open, the metal groaning as it swung out into the storm. He stood up, the rain plastering his hair to his scalp, his clothes instantly heavy with water. The red and blue lights painted the scene in frantic lurid strokes, turning the rain into falling shards of colored glass. He was standing on the side of a forgotten highway in the middle of a biblical deluge, facing a man who had already decided he was guilty. "Turn around." Hands on the roof of the car, Leo obeyed. He placed his palms on the cold wet metal of his Honda. The position was one of submission, of utter helplessness. He stared out into the blackness of the plains, the world reduced to the sound of the storm and the thudding of his own heart. He heard the snap of a latex glove. The sound was clinical, sterile, and terrifying. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer began, his voice a low monotone in Leo's ear. A hand, now sheathed in slick latex, pressed down hard between his shoulder blades. Another hand began to pat him down, starting at his ankles and moving up with a slow, methodical thoroughness that was both professional and deeply personal. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "I don't understand," Leo whispered, his face pressed against the car. "I didn't do anything." The hand on his back pressed harder. "You have the right to..." An attorney, If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. The officer's hand found the wallet in Leo's back pocket and pulled it out. Do you understand the rights I have just read to you? Yes, but this is a mistake. Leo's voice rose, a note of hysteria creeping in. You have to believe me. The officer ignored him. Leo heard the sound of his wallet being opened, the rustle of his cash, the slide of his credit cards. Then, a new sound, a faint metallic click. It came from near the front of the car. It was a sound he didn't recognize, but it sent a fresh jolt of terror through him. What was that? Leo asked, trying to turn his head. Stay still, the officer commanded, his voice a whip crack. He had moved away from Leo, toward the front of the vehicle. Leo could see his distorted reflection in the rain-streaked side mirror. The officer was kneeling near the front bumper, his back to Leo. He was doing something, his movements quick and furtive. What are you doing? Leo demanded, his fear turning to a desperate, angry confusion. The officer stood up and walked back, toward him, his boots crunching on the gravel. He was holding something in his gloved hand. It was a small, clear plastic baggie. Inside it was something white and crystalline. Well, the officer said, his voice dripping with mock surprise. What do we have here? He held the baggie up in front of Leo's face. Looks like about an ounce of methamphetamine. Found it tucked up under your front license plate. Leo stared at the baggie, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. It was impossible. It was absurd. It was a scene from a bad movie, not his life. That's not mine, he breathed, the words catching in his throat. I've never seen that before in my life. You put it there. I saw you. I heard you. The officer chuckled, a low, ugly sound. You saw me do my job, son. You saw me find your contraband. The bolo said to be on the lookout for narcotics trafficking. 2. Looks like we hit the jackpot tonight. He grabbed Leo's wrist, his grip like a vice. He twisted Leo's arm behind his back with a brutal efficiency that sent a bolt of white-hot pain shooting up to his shoulder. Leo cried out, his legs buckling. The officer wrenched his other arm back, the movement sharp and violent. The cold, unforgiving steel of handcuffs clamped around his wrists, biting into his skin. You're under arrest, the officer said, his voice a triumphant growl in Leo's ear. He shoved Leo forward, his face scraping against the rough surface of the car's roof. For possession with intent to distribute, and for other things, we'll figure out the details down at the station. No, Leo screamed, the sound torn from his throat, a raw, ragged cry of pure, unadulterated terror. He thrashed, a wild, futile struggle against the immovable force of the lawman. You can't do this. This is insane. You planted that. Someone has to help me. Please. His only answer was the roar of the storm. The officer jerked him upright and began to march him toward the patrol car, its open door, awaiting more. The red and blue lights strobed across Leo's face, illuminating the tears and rain that streamed down his cheeks. He saw the officer's face clearly for the first time, reflected in the patrol car's window. The man was older than he'd thought, his face a roadmap of broken veins, his eyes small and hard, like chips of flint. And on his face, there was a smile. It was a thin, cruel, satisfied smile. It was the smile of a man who enjoyed his work. It was the smile of a man who had just broken another man's life for sport, and who would sleep soundly tonight. As he was shoved into the back of the car, the hard plastic of the seat, cold and unyielding, Leo's mind snagged on a single, horrifying detail. The officer hadn't been wearing a body camera. His own dashcam, a cheap model he'd bought on Amazon, was still sitting on the passenger seat, unplugged. He'd meant to set it up before he left, but he'd been in a hurry. There was no record, no proof. It was his word against the word of a man with a badge, a gun, and a bag of drugs he'd produced from thin air. The door slammed shut, the sound a final, deafening boom. The world outside the smeared rain-lashed window became a distorted blur of flashing lights and impenetrable darkness. The officer got back in the driver's seat, the car dipping with his weight. He didn't look back at Leo. He picked up his radio, his voice calm and professional as he reported the arrest. Leo stared through the cage that separated the front and back seats, his breath fogging the plexiglass. He was trapped. A 30-year-old man, on his way to visit his dying mother, had just vanished from the face of the earth. He had driven into a storm and found a monster waiting for him. And as the patrol car pulled away, leaving his own car abandoned on the side of the road like a tombstone, a single soul-shattering realization crashed down on him with the force of the storm itself. He was never going to make it to his destination. He was never going to be seen again. His life, as he knew it, was over. The road ahead was no longer a road. It was the end of everything, and no one in the world knew where he was. The man who was no longer Leo, but simply a prisoner, was a collection of broken pieces. His name was Leo Martinez. He was an architect, or he had been. He designed spaces where people could live and work and feel safe, a quiet irony that felt like a punch to the gut. He lived in a small, clean apartment in Austin, filled with books on structural engineering and sketches of buildings that would never be built. He had a sister, Maya, who was a firecracker, a fighter, the one who always stood up to the bullies while he hid behind her. He had a mother in a nursing home in Oakhaven, her mind a flickering candle in the wind, and the purpose of his journey was to sit with her, to hold her hand, and perhaps, for a fleeting moment, to be recognized by the woman who gave him life. He was a good man. He was a quiet man. He paid his taxes. He rescued a stray cat once. He called his sister every Sunday. He had never so much as received a speeding ticket. This was the mosaic of his life, a life of gentle, unassuming colors. And now, a man in a tan uniform had smashed it to dust. He sat in the darkness of a cell that smelled of bleach and despair. The rain had stopped, but the air was still thick with the damp chill of the storm. The cell was concrete and steel, a featureless gray box. There was a slab of concrete for a bed and a toilet in the corner. There was no window. Time had ceased to exist, measured only by the hollow echo of his own breathing and the distant, infrequent clang of a steel door. How long had he been here? A day? 2? He didn't know. They had taken his watch, along with his wallet, his phone, and his dignity. They had fingerprinted him, photographed him, and processed him with a board. Mechanical efficiency that was more terrifying than overt cruelty. He was no longer a person. He was a file number, a piece of paperwork, an inconvenient problem to be solved and filed away. The man who had done this to him, the man with the flintchip eyes and the cruel smile, was Sheriff Brody. Leo had learned his name from the younger deputy, a nervous, pimply kid named Calloway who couldn't meet his eyes. Calloway had been the one to bring him a tray of food, a slice of white bread, a rubbery piece of bologna, and a cup of lukewarm water. It was Calloway who, in a moment of what might have been pity or simply carelessness, had muttered, "Sheriff, Brody wants to see you in the morning. Just do what he says, man, it's easier." Sheriff Brody. The name was a brand on Leo's mind. Brody was the king of this small, forgotten kingdom. He was the law, the judge, and the executioner, all wrapped in a folksy good old boy package that made him all the more monstrous. Brody hadn't come to see him yet. He was letting him marinate in the fear, letting the silence and the uncertainty do their work. It was a deliberate, calculated cruelty. Leo remembered the sheriff's hand on his back, the casual strength in it, the way he'd twisted his arm without a flicker of emotion. This was a man who was intimately familiar with the mechanics of pain. He was a man whose past was likely littered with the broken bodies and shattered lives of anyone who had dared to cross him. He was a man who saw the world as a nail and his badge as a hammer. And Leo was the nail dot. He thought of Maya. She would be frantic by now. She would have called his phone 100 times, the calls going straight to the black hole where his life used to be. She would have called the Oakhaven nursing home, her voice tight with a panicky hope, only to be told he never arrived. Then, the real fear would set in. Maya was not like him. She would not be quiet. She would not wait. She would burn down the world to find him. The thought was a small, flickering ember of hope in the vast, cold darkness of his despair. But what could she do against a man like Brody? What could a sister's love do against a system designed to protect its own? A system where a man's word was law, and the truth was whatever he said it was. He pictured Maya, her fierce, protective eyes, and he felt a surge of guilt. He had always been the one she protected. Now, he was the one who had put her in the path of the monster. Far away, in another world of buzzing fluorescent lights and the scent of antiseptic, a young woman named Sarah swept the floor of a gas station convenience store. The station was called the Oasis, a cruel joke in the middle of a 100-mile stretch of nothing. Sarah was 19, with eyes that were perpetually tired and a future that felt as flat and empty as the landscape around her. She had been working the night shift when the storm hit. She had been the one who sold a cup of coffee to the quiet, nervous-looking man in the old Honda. She remembered him because he'd been polite. He'd said thank you and made eye contact, a small act of human decency that was rare enough to be memorable in her line of work. He had a kind face, she thought, sad eyes. She had seen the patrol car. She had been standing by the window, watching the rain, when the red and blue lights had flashed to life down the road. She had seen the Honda pull over. She had seen the big, familiar shape of Sheriff Brody get out of his car. She knew that shape. Everyone in the county knew that shape. It was a shape that meant trouble. Her first instinct, a reflex born of years of living in a place where you learned to mind your own business, was to step away from the window. Don't see anything, don't know anything. It was the unofficial motto of the county, but she had lingered for a moment too long. She had seen the man from the Honda get out of his car, his hands raised. She had seen Brody shove him against the roof. She had felt a knot of unease tighten in her stomach. It looked wrong, it felt wrong. But what could she do? She was Sarah, the girl who worked the night shift at the Oasis. He was Sheriff Brody, the man who held the town in the palm of his scarred, meaty hand. Her father's words echoed in her memory, a constant refrain from her childhood. You keep your head down, you hear me. You don't make waves. In a town this small, waves can drown you. So she had turned away. She had gone about her work, restocking the beef jerky, wiping down the coffee machine, trying to ignore the silent, flashing drama, unfolding just a few hundred yards down the road. She told herself it was none of her business. The man had probably done something wrong. Brody was just doing his job. She repeated the lies until they started to feel like the truth. But a small, persistent splinter of guilt had lodged itself in her heart. The man had had such kind eyes. Later, after the patrol car had driven away, leaving the Honda behind like an abandoned shell, she had to take out the trash. The rain had subsided to a miserable drizzle. The air was cold and clean. As she walked past the dumpster, her cheap sneakers squelching in the mud, she saw something. A glint of light from the overflowing trash can near the gas pumps. Curiosity, or maybe something else, something she couldn't name, made her stop. She reached into the cold, wet mess of discarded coffee cups and lottery tickets and pulled it out. It was a small black plastic device, a dash cam. It was cheap, the kind you buy online for $20. The USB cord was still attached, dangling. Like a tail, she recognized it. She'd seen it sitting on the passenger seat of the man's Honda when he'd paid for his coffee. He must have tossed it. Why? Maybe he didn't want the sheriff to see it. Maybe he was hiding something. That was the logical explanation. That was the explanation that would allow her to go back inside, throw the device back in the trash, and forget the whole thing. But she didn't. She stood there in the rain, the dashcam cold and heavy in her hand. She thought of the man's sad, kind eyes. She thought of the way Sheriff Brody had shoved him. She thought of her father's fearful warnings. A war was raging inside her. A war between the instinct for self-preservation and the whisper of a conscience she didn't know she had. With a furtive glance around the empty, rain-slicked lot, she slipped the dashcam into the pocket of her hoodie. She didn't know why. It was a dangerous secret. It was a piece of a story she didn't want to be a part of, but she couldn't bring herself to throw it away. It felt like throwing away a voice, and as she walked back into the bright, sterile light of the gas station, the small, hard rectangle in her pocket felt like a judgment. Sheriff Dale Brody sat in his office, the worn leather of his chair groaning. Under his weight, the office was his sanctuary, a shrine to his own ego. The walls were covered in mounted deer heads, their glass eyes staring out with a placid stupidity that Brody found comforting. There were plaques of commendation, a framed photo of him shaking the hand of a state senator, and a large, detailed map of his county, his dominion. He was sipping a cup of black coffee, the bitter taste of familiar comfort. He was a man of simple pleasures, a hot coffee, a well-oiled gun, and the sweet, intoxicating feeling of absolute control. The Martinez kid was in the holding cell, stewing. Brody liked to let them stew. It softened them up. Fear was a more effective tool than any rubber hose. He'd seen the kid's face when he'd found the meth. The pure, unadulterated shock, the dawning horror. It was a look he'd seen many times before. It was the look of a man realizing that the rules he thought governed the world didn't apply here. Here, Brody was the rules. This wasn't about justice, it was about business. A week ago, Mr. Abernathy, the man who owned half the county and held the mortgage on the other half, had called him Abernathy's teenage daughter, high on pills she'd bought from some local trash, had gotten into a fender bender. A minor thing, but Abernathy was a man who didn't tolerate minor things. He wanted the drug problem handled. He wanted a message sent. He didn't care who it was, as long as it was an outsider, someone with no local ties, no family to make a fuss. "Find me a ghost, Dale," Abernathy had said, his voice smooth as silk and cold as a grave. "Someone who can disappear without anyone noticing." And then, like a gift from God, Leo Martinez had driven into his storm. A city boy, alone, passing through. No one would miss him, not for a while. By the time they did, he'd be deep in the system, another faceless junkie caught with a bag of dope. He'd take a plea deal, do a few years, and the problem would be solved. Abernathy would be happy, the town would feel safe, and Brody's position would be secure. It was a neat, clean solution. A piece of administrative housekeeping. He took another sip of his coffee. The kid in the cell had no idea how small he was, how insignificant in the grand scheme of things. He was just a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. Brody felt a familiar, pleasant warmth spread through his chest. It was the feeling of power. The power to create a story, to shape a reality, to turn an innocent man into a monster with nothing more than a baggie of meth and the weight of his own authority. He looked at the deer on his wall. Their eyes were vacant, their expressions unchanging. They were trophies. They were proof of his skill, his dominance. The Martinez kid was just another trophy, one he would mount on the wall of his career. He finished his coffee, the last dregs thick and bitter. It was time to go and see his prisoner. It was time to make him confess. The first 24 hours of Leo's absence were a quiet, gnawing worry for his sister, Maya. Leo was meticulous, a man of routines. If he said he would call at a certain time, he called. If he said he would arrive by evening, the sun would not set before his car was in the driveway. So when Thursday evening bled into Friday morning with no word, the worry in Maya's chest began to curdle into fear. She called his cell phone. It went straight to voicemail, the mailbox full. The message was his voice, calm and steady, a voice from a world that no longer seemed to exist. "Hi, you've reached Leo. Leave a message." She left 10. Each one more frantic than the last. "Leo, it's me. Just call me please. I'm starting to get worried." "Leo, where are you? Mum's nurse said you never showed. Is everything okay? Did you get a flat? Call me." "Damn it, Leo, this isn't funny. Pick up the phone. I'm calling the police if I don't hear from you in the next hour." She called the police. She started with the highway patrol, her voice trembling as she filed a missing persons report. They were polite, professional, and utterly unhelpful. "A grown man," they explained, "has the right to go missing." He was probably just clearing his head. Had he been depressed? Any recent arguments? The questions were a subtle poison, planting seeds of doubt, shifting the blame onto the victim. Maya, her temper flaring, snapped at the dispatcher. "My brother is not clearing his head. He was on his way to see our sick mother. Something is wrong. The dispatcher promised to put out a bolo. The acronym, meant to be reassuring, sounded like a hollow platitude. By Saturday, the fear was a living thing, a cold, heavy beast sitting on her chest. She couldn't eat, she couldn't sleep. She paced her small apartment, Leo's smiling face in a picture frame on her bookshelf, mocking her with its carefree innocence. She knew with a certainty that defied logic and reason that something terrible had happened. Leo was not the kind of person to have an adventure. He was the kind of person who had a plan. And his plan had been to drive to Awaka, so she started calling every police department along his route. She had his itinerary, a printout from Google Maps. He'd emailed her before he left. "Just so you know my path, sis, safety first." He'd written. The words were now a cruel joke. She started with the big cities and worked her way down to the small, forgotten towns that dotted the map like flyspecks. Most of the conversations were the same. A bored-sounding officer would take the information, promise to look into it, and hang up. The calls were a blur of indifference. Until she called the Culberson County Sheriff's Department. The phone was answered by a man with a slow, folksy drawl. "Sheriff Brody speaking." Maya launched into her speech, the words practiced and desperate. "My name is Maya Martinez. I'm calling to report my brother, Leo Martinez, missing. He was driving a silver 2014 Honda Accord, license plate." "Whoa, slow down there, little lady," the sheriff interrupted. The term little lady set her teeth on edge. "Martinez, you say?" Silver Honda. A wild, desperate hope surged in Maya's chest. "Yes. Have you seen him? Have you seen his car?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. Maya could hear the sound of a chair creaking, the rustle of papers. "D'you that name does ring a bell," Sheriff Brody said, his voice thoughtful. "Yeah, we had a fella by that name come through here a couple nights ago." "You did?" Maya sank onto her couch, her legs suddenly weak with relief. "Oh, thank God. Is he there? Is he okay? What happened?" "Well, now that's the thing," Brody said, his voice taking on a somber tone. "He's here, all right. But I wouldn't say he's okay." The relief evaporated, replaced by a cold dread. "What do you mean? What's wrong?" "We had to arrest him, ma'am," Brody said. The ma'am was a slap in the face. Pulled him over on a routine traffic stop. Found a rather large quantity of methamphetamine in his vehicle. He's being held on a possession with intent to distribute charge. The world tilted on its axis. Maya couldn't breathe. The words made no sense. They were a random collection of sounds, a language she didn't understand. "What? Methamphetamine? Leah?" No, that's impossible. You have the wrong person. My brother. He wouldn't even know what that looks like. He's an architect. He volunteers at an animal shelter." The protests sounded feeble, even to her own ears. "Ma'am," Brody said, his voice hardening. The folksy charm peeling away to reveal the granite beneath. "I've been a lawman for 30 years. I know what I found, and I know the type. Your brother was high as a kite when we brought him in, agitated, belligerent, spouting all sorts of nonsense." "I want to talk to him," Maya demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and rage. "Put him on the phone. Now." "I'm afraid I can't do that," Brody said smoothly. "He's in no condition to speak to anyone. Besides, it's an active investigation. But you're welcome to come down and see him. Once he's been arraigned, of course, you'll need to hire him a lawyer, a good one. These are serious charges." The line went dead. Maya sat in the silence, the receiver still pressed to her ear. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and terror. Leo, drugs. It was a lie. It had to be a lie. A grotesque, monstrous lie. But the sheriff had sounded so sure, so confident. He had her brother. He had him in a cage. And he was painting him as a monster. The beast of fear on her chest shifted, and a new, more dangerous emotion took its place. Rage. A cold, clear, incandescent rage. They had picked the wrong family. They had picked the wrong brother. And they had picked the wrong sister. She stood up, her movements sharp and decisive. She grabbed her keys, her purse. She walked out of her apartment without a backward glance. The drive to Culberson County was 8 hours. She would be there by morning. And she would not be coming alone. She would find a lawyer. She would find the truth. She would burn Sheriff Brody's whole world to the ground. In his cell, Leo was fading. The initial shock had given way to a dull, throbbing despair. Brody had visited him once. He hadn't been violent, he had been worse. He had been calm. He sat on a stool just outside the bars, sipping a cup of coffee, and he'd talked. He'd painted a picture for Leo, a detailed, vivid portrait of his future. "Here's how it's gonna go, son," Brody had said, his voice a low, conspiratorial murmur. "You're gonna be arraigned. The judge, Judge Miller, he's a good friend of mine. He's gonna set bail so high your city girl sister won't be able to touch it. Then you're gonna sit here for weeks, maybe months. The public defender, old Mr. Abercrombie, he's a nice man, drinks a little too much. He'll tell you to take the plea. Everyone does. And you will too. Because the alternative is a trial. And in my county, in front of my jury, with my testimony, you'll get 20 years. You'll be 45 when you get out. Your mama will be long gone. Your sister will have moved on. Your life will be a memory. Or, you can confess. You can sign a piece of paper that says the meth was yours. You can say you were just a mule, scared, made a mistake. You'll get 5 years. Out in 3 with good behavior. You'll still be young enough to start over." He'd left the confession on the floor, a single sheet of paper and a pen, just within reach through the bars. "You think about it, son," he'd said before walking away. "You think about what your life is worth." The confession lay there, a white flag in the grey darkness. It was a temptation. A siren song of surrender. 3 years. It was a lifetime, but it was not forever. 20 years was a death sentence. Brody had crafted the choice with a surgeon's precision, offering a path of lesser destruction that was, in itself, a complete annihilation of the truth. To sign it would be to kill the man he was. To not sign it would be to let Brody kill the man he could have become. He was being systematically erased. His name, his past, his truth, all of it was being stripped away, layer by layer, until nothing was left but the caricature Brody had created. Leo Martinez, the drug-addled felon from the big city. He lay on the concrete slab, his body aching, his mind numb. He felt himself becoming a ghost, haunting the ruins of his own life. The only thing that kept him anchored to reality was the image of Maya's face, her fierce, unyielding eyes. She wouldn't believe it. She would fight, but the hope was a double-edged sword. Her fighting would bring her here. It would bring her into Brody's kingdom, and Leo knew, with a chilling certainty, that the monster who had swallowed him whole would not hesitate to devour her. To Dot at the Oasis gas station, Sarah was haunted by a ghost she had helped create. Every time a car pulled in, she half expected to see the sad-eyed man from the Honda. Every time the bell over the door jingled, she looked up, her heart lurching, expecting to see his sister, or his mother, or someone with a missing flyer, and questions in their eyes. The dashcam was hidden in her room, tucked away in a shoebox under her bed, along with other forgotten relics of her teenage years. It was a ticking bomb. She'd seen the local paper. There was a small article on the third page, a crime blotter report. Austin man arrested on drug charges. It named him Leo Martinez. It quoted Sheriff Brody, who praised the proactive police work that was keeping their county safe from outside criminal elements. The article was a lie. Sarah knew it was a lie. She had seen the stop. She had seen Brody's furtive movements near the front of the car. She held the proof of the lie in a shoebox under her bed. The guilt was a physical thing, a constant low-grade nausea. It made the food taste like ash, the air feel too thick to breathe. She became jumpy, irritable. Her father noticed. "What's gotten into you, girl?" he'd asked, his brow furrowed with a weary concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm just tired, Daddy," she'd lied, the words feeling slick and ugly in her mouth. Her fear of Sheriff Brody was a tangible living presence. He was a fixture in the town, a man who moved with an unassailable aura of power. He would stop by the oasis for coffee, his patrol car idling by the pumps. He'd lean on the counter, making small talk, and Sarah would feel her blood run cold. His eyes would linger on her for a moment too long, a flicker of something knowing and predatory in their depths. Did he know she'd seen? Did he suspect? Or was this just how he looked at everyone, as a potential problem to be managed, a potential nail to be hammered down? One afternoon, he came in while she was mopping the floor. He was alone. He got his coffee and stood by the counter, watching her. "You're a hard worker, Sarah," he said, his voice a low drawl. "Don't see that much in your generation." "Yes'sir," she mumbled, keeping her eyes on the floor, the mop handle slick in her sweaty palms. "You keep your eyes and ears open out here," he continued, his voice casual, but with an underlying edge of steel. "You see a lot of folks passing through. Some of them, they're not right. They bring their big city problems with them. Drugs, filth. You see anything that don't look right, you call me. You hear." It wasn't a request, it was a command, and it was a warning. He was telling her to be his eyes and ears. He was also telling her what she was expected to see, and what she was expected to ignore. He was drawing a line in the sand. "You're either with me, or you're against me." "Yes'sir," she whispered again, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I will." He finished his coffee, tossed the cup in the trash, and gave her one last, long look. "Good girl," he said. Then he left. Sarah leaned on her mop, her body trembling. The air in the small store felt thick, suffocating. She was trapped. She was a witness who had been sworn to silence by the very man she had witnessed. The dashcam under her bed was no longer just a secret. It was a potential death sentence. To keep it was a risk. To use it was unthinkable. But to destroy it would be to destroy the last faint echo of the sad-eyed man's truth. And she wasn't sure she could live with that. The guilt was bad, but the thought of being a willing accomplice to such a monstrous injustice was worse. She was caught in an impossible trap, and every direction she looked, she saw the smiling, predatory face of Sheriff Brody. The lawyer, Maya found, was a man named Ben Carter. He was the opposite of what she'd expected. He wasn't a slick, high-powered attorney from a glass tower. He was a rumpled, wary-looking man in his late 50s, with a kind, intelligent face and an office that smelled of old books and stale coffee. He was a former public defender who had gone into private practice to fight the battles no one else would. He specialized in police misconduct cases. He had heard the name Sheriff Brody before. He listened to Maya's story in his cluttered Austin. Officer's face grim, he didn't interrupt. He let her pour out her fear, her rage, her absolute certainty of her brother's innocence. When she was finished, her voice hoarse, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "I'll be honest with you, Ms. Martinez," he said, his voice calm and steady. "What you're describing is a classic roadside shakedown. It's a specialty of certain law enforcement officers in these rural counties. They target out-of-towners, people with no local connections. They plant evidence, usually drugs, and coerce a confession or a plea deal. It's a way to boost their conviction rates, generate revenue from fines and forfeitures, and in some cases, do favors for powerful local figures." "So you believe me?" Maya asked, a wave of relief washing over her. "I believe that your brother's story deserves to be heard," Carter said carefully. "But believing it and proving it are two very different things. Sheriff Brody has a badge, a uniform, and a bag of evidence with your brother's car. Right now, all we have is your word against his, and in his county, his word is gospel. So, what do we do?" Maya asked, the hope that had flared within her beginning to dim. "We fight," Carter said, a flicker of fire in his weary eyes. "We go there. We demand to see your brother. We file motions. We challenge the evidence. We ask for the patrol car's dashcam and bodycam footage. We make noise. We show them that Leo Martinez is not some ghost who can disappear without a fight. We show them he has a sister who will tear down the sky for him." He paused, his expression turning serious. "But I need you to be prepared. This will be ugly. Brody will not play fair. He will threaten you. He will intimidate you. He will use every dirty trick in the book. Are you ready for that? Maya looked at the picture of Leo on her phone. His gentle, smiling face. I'm ready, she said, her voice low and fierce. Let's go to war. The drive to Culberson County with Ben Carter was tense and quiet. The landscape grew more desolate, the world outside the car turning into a blur of brown and gray. As they passed the sign that read, "Welcome to Culberson County, Dale Brody, Sheriff," Maya felt a chill crawl up her spine. She was entering enemy territory. She was walking into the monster's lair, but she was not alone this time, and she was not afraid. She was a vessel of pure, cold rage. And she was about to come face to face with the man who had stolen her brother. The confrontation was inevitable. The explosion was coming. And Maya was ready to light the fuse. The plot twist, the fulcrum on which the entire nightmare would turn, wasn't a dramatic courtroom confession or a last-minute discovery by a brilliant lawyer. It was something far quieter, far more mundane. It was a squeaky bathroom door and a young woman's nagging conscience. Maya and Ben Carter had been in Culberson County for 3 days, 3 days of hellish, bureaucratic warfare. They had seen Leo. The sight of him had shattered Maya's heart and solidified her rage into something as hard and cold as diamond. He was a ghost of himself, thin, pale, with a haunted, vacant look in his eyes. He had a bruise on his cheek. That he wouldn't explain. He spoke in whispers, terrified that Brody's ears were everywhere. He told them about the confession, the choice he'd been given. Maybe I should just sign it, Maya, he'd whispered, his voice cracking. 3 years. I can survive 3 years. You will not sign anything, Maya had hissed back, her voice a low, fierce promise. You are not a criminal. We are getting you out of here. But their efforts were met with a wall of smiling, folksy obstruction. Carter's requests for discovery were balked. His motion for a bail reduction was denied by a stone-faced Judge Miller, who barely glanced at the paperwork before siding with the prosecutor. The request for Brody's dashcam and bodycam footage was met with a shrug and a statement that the equipment had unfortunately malfunctioned during the storm on the night of the arrest. It was a perfect, seamless conspiracy of silence. The system was protecting its own. They were trapped in a spiderweb, and every move they made only seemed to entangle them further. Defeated and exhausted, Maya decided to retrace Leo's steps. It was an act of desperation, a need to connect with the last moments of his freedom. She drove the long, empty stretch of highway where he'd been arrested, the place now feeling like sacred, desecrated ground. She drove until she reached the oasis, the only landmark for 50 miles in either direction. The place looked as bleak and lonely as she felt. She walked inside, the bell over the door jingling, a cheerful sound in a cheerless place. A young woman with tired eyes and a nervous energy was behind the counter. Sarah. Maya didn't know her name. She just saw a potential witness, a last faint hope. Hi, Maya began, her voice raw from lack of sleep. My brother was here a few nights ago. His name is Leo Martinez. He was driving a silver Honda. Did you see him? She held up a photo of Leo on her phone. Sarah's face went pale. She stared at the photo, then at Maya, her eyes wide with a terrified recognition. She looked like a cornered animal. I don't know, she stammered, her gaze darting toward the door, as if expecting Sheriff Brody to walk in at any moment. We get a lot of people through here. The denial was too quick, too panicked. Maya knew she was lying. She leaned forward, her voice dropping, pleading, please. His name is Leo. They've arrested him. They're saying he had drugs, but it's a lie. I know it's a lie. He's not that person. He's a good person. He has sad eyes, but he's kind. Did you see him? Did you see anything? The description sad eyes was a key in a lock. It was too specific, too true. Sarah's composure crumbled. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. I can't, she whispered, shaking her head. You don't understand, you have to go. I'm not leaving, Maya said, her voice firm but gentle. She saw the fear in the young woman's eyes, and she understood it. This wasn't a monster. This was a terrified child. I'm not angry with you. I just want to find the truth. I just want to save my brother. Please, if you saw anything at all. Sarah looked around the empty store. She took a deep, shuddering breath. The war inside her had reached its breaking point. The guilt had finally won. He was here, she said, her voice barely audible. He bought coffee, he was polite. She hesitated, then the words came out in a rush. I saw the sheriff pull him over. Down the road. I saw him get out of the car. It was something. It was confirmation. But it wasn't enough. Did you see anything else? Maya pressed. Sarah wrung her hands, her knuckles white. I have to go to the bathroom, she said abruptly. A strange, panicked non sequitur. She turned and fled, disappearing through a door marked employees only. Maya waited, her heart pounding. Was she calling Brody? Was she running away? Minutes stretched into an eternity. Just as Maya was about to give up, Sarah re-emerged. Her face was still pale, but the fear in her eyes had been replaced by a look of grim resolve. She didn't say a word. She walked past Maya, locked the front door of the gas station, and flipped the open sign to closed. Come with me, she said, her voice trembling but firm. She led Maya out the back door of the station, to a small, dilapidated trailer that sat behind a chain-link fence. This was where she lived. The trailer was neat and tidy on the inside. A small pocket of order in a world of chaos. Sarah walked to her bedroom and knelt down, pulling a shoebox from under her bed. Her hands were shaking as she opened it. After the sheriff took him away, she said, her voice a low, shaky whisper, I went to take out the trash, and I found this in the bin by the pumps. He must have thrown it out. She held it out to Maya. It was a small, black plastic rectangle. A dashcam. Maya stared at it, her mind struggling to comprehend the significance. Leo's dashcam. He'd bought it just for this trip. Why would he throw it away? Unless he was afraid. Unless he saw the lights behind him and, in a moment of panic, tried to get rid of the one thing that could record what was about to happen, fearing it would be used against him. An innocent man, so conditioned to believe the system was fair, that he couldn't imagine the camera could be his salvation. Is there a memory card in it? Maya asked, her voice hoarse. Sarah nodded. I don't have a computer. I didn't know what to do, I was so scared. They drove to Maya's motel room, the dashcam sitting on the seat between them, like a holy relic. Ben Carter was there, and he watched in stunned silence as Maya explained what had happened. He took the small memory card from the camera with the careful precision of a bomb disposal expert and slid it into his laptop. The three of them huddled around the small screen, their breath held in a collective silent prayer. Carter clicked on the first video file. The screen flickered to life. The view was familiar. The dashboard of Leo's Honda, the rain-streaked windshield, the hypnotic rhythm of the wipers. The timestamp in the corner confirmed it was the night he disappeared. They heard Leo's soft, humming along to a song on the radio. They saw the world through his eyes. And then, they saw it. The blinding flash of red and blue lights in the rearview mirror. They heard Leo's sharp intake of breath, the muttered curse under his breath. They heard him kill the radio. The video recorded the entire stop. The audio was crystal clear. The camera's microphone surprisingly sensitive. They heard Sheriff Brody's gravelly voice. The demand for license and registration. They heard Leo's polite, nervous replies. They heard Brody's accusation. You fit a description. And then they saw it. The moment that changed everything. As Brody ordered Leo out of the car, the camera, positioned on the dashboard, captured a reflection in the driver's side window. It was distorted, warped by the rain and the curve of the glass, but it was undeniable. It showed Sheriff Brody walking to the front of the Honda, out of Leo's line of sight. It showed him kneeling down. It showed his hand, holding a small, clear baggie, and tucking it into the space behind the license plate. The camera recorded the faint, metallic click that Leo had heard. Then the audio captured the rest. Brody's mock surprise as he discovered the drugs, Leo's frantic, terrified denials. "You planted that. I saw you. I heard you." And Brody's low, ugly chuckle, but it wasn't over. The camera kept recording as Brody cuffed a screaming, pleading Leo and shoved him into the patrol car. And then, the final damning piece of the puzzle. Brody, thinking he was alone, leaned back into the open window of the Honda, presumably to grab the keys. He wasn't looking at the dashcam, but his voice was picked up, clear as a bell. He pulled out his own phone, dialed a number, and spoke. "It's done," Brody said, his voice low and satisfied. "The package is secure. Yeah, the architect from Austin, he's off the board. You tell Abernathy his problem is solved. Number loose ends." He chuckled again. "Yeah, he'll be gone for a long, long time." He hung up. The video ended a few moments later as the camera's battery died. The three of them sat in the stunned, ringing silence of the motel room. The air was thick with the magnitude of what they had just seen. It wasn't just a dirty cop planting drugs, it was a conspiracy, a hit, ordered by a man named Abernathy, carried out by the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the county. They hadn't just found a piece of evidence. They had found the whole rotten truth. They had a recording of the crime, the cover-up, and the motive. Sarah was openly weeping, a mixture of terror and catharsis. Ben Carter stared at the screen, his face pale, a look of grim, furious vindication in his eyes. And Maya felt a stillness descend upon her. The rage was gone, burned away, and replaced by something colder, harder, and infinitely more dangerous. It was the certainty of justice. "He named him," Maya said, her voice a dead, flat calm. "Abernathy. Who is Abernathy?" Carter looked up from the laptop, his eyes meeting hers. "James Abernathy," he said, his voice grave. "He's a rancher, a land developer. He owns most of this county. He's a former state senator. He's considered untouchable. He's the man who pulls all the strings, and we just got him on tape, ordering the abduction and false imprisonment of your brother." The stakes had just changed. This was no longer about saving Leo from a corrupt sheriff. This was about taking down a king and his entire kingdom. The small, cheap dashcam, discarded in a trash can, had become the most dangerous weapon in Texas. And Maya knew exactly what she was going to do with it. She was not going to the state police. She was not going to the FBI. This was too big, the rot too deep. You couldn't trust the system to police itself, no. This required a different kind of justice. It required a public execution. "Ben," she said, her voice like ice. "Get me the number of every news station in this state, and find me the biggest, most public event that James Abernathy will be attending in the next week. We're going to release this tape, but we're not going to leak it. We're going to premiere it." The cinematic payoff, the moment of public reckoning, was orchestrated with the precision of a military strike. James Abernathy, it turned out, was hosting his annual Culberson County Pride Barbecue and Town Hall in 5 days. It was a massive public relations event, a carefully staged piece of political theater where Abernathy played the role of benevolent patriarch, shaking hands, kissing babies, and reassuring the populace that he was their protector. State politicians, business leaders, and media from across Texas would be in attendance. It was the perfect stage. Ben Carter, using his network of contacts, found the perfect partner, a sharp, fearless investigative journalist from Dallas named Maria Flores, who had built her career on exposing corruption in high places. She listened to the story, watched the video, and her eyes lit up with the predatory glee of a shark that smells blood in the water. She and her team immediately began working in secret, coordinating with Maya and Ben. The plan was audacious. The town hall was being held in the newly renovated high school auditorium, a project funded by an Abernathy donation. It was equipped with a state-of-the-art audio-visual system, including a massive projector screen behind the stage. Maria's tech expert, a young hacker who owed her a favor, found a backdoor into the system's network. They could hijack the feed. The day of the event was hot and dry. the Texas sun beating down with an unforgiving intensity. The auditorium was packed. The air buzzed with cheerful chatter, the smell of barbecue smoke drifting in from outside. Sheriff Brody stood near the stage, resplendent in his dress uniform, a genial, smiling guardian of the peace. James Abernathy, a handsome silver-haired man with a politician's easy charm, was at the podium, basking in the applause. Maya, Ben, and Sarah sat in the back row, invisible in the crowd. Sarah was trembling, clutching Maya's hand. Maya was preternaturally calm, her heart a cold, steady drum. Abernathy began his speech, his voice smooth and reassuring. He talked about family values, about protecting their way of life from outside influences, from the crime and decay of the big cities. He spoke of the recent arrest of a drug trafficker passing through their county, praising Sheriff Brody's vigilance. Thanks to the tireless work of men like Sheriff Brody, Abernathy boomed, gesturing to the beaming sheriff. Our children are safe, our streets are clean, and our values are protected. The crowd erupted in applause. Brody gave a humble, folksy waved up. It was at that moment that Maria Flores, sitting in a news van a block away, gave the signal. Now, in the auditorium, the massive screen behind Abernathy, which had been displaying a patriotic image of a waving Texas flag, suddenly flickered and went black. A collective murmur went through the crowd. Abernathy paused, looking over his shoulder. With a flash of annoyance, "Looks like we're having a little technical difficulty, folks," he chuckled. And then, the screen came to life. The image was shaky, the perspective low. It was the view from a dashboard. The sound of rain, the squeak of wipers. A wave of confusion rippled through the audience. Then, the flashing red and blue lights filled the screen. On the stage, Sheriff Brody's smile froze. His face went slack, the color draining from it. Abernathy stared at the screen, his easy charm evaporating, replaced by a look of pure, cold fury. The video played. The entire unedited recording. The audience sat in stunned, absolute silence, their folksy pride turning to horrified disbelief. They heard Leo's polite, frightened voice. They heard Brody's accusations. They watched, on a screen 20 feet high, the reflection in the window. They saw the sheriff of their county, their protector, kneel down and plant a bag of drugs on an innocent man. The gasp that went through the room was a single collective sound of shock and betrayal. They heard Leo's desperate screams of "You planted that." They heard Brody's ugly chuckle. They saw him cuff a man who was weeping and pleading for his life, and then came the phone call. Brody's voice, clear as a bell, filled the silent auditorium. "It's done. The package is secure. You tell Abernathy his problem is solved. No loose ends." Abernathy, the name hung in the air, an indictment, a gunshot in a library. Every single person in the room turned, as one, to stare at the silver-haired man on the stage. James Abernathy stood frozen, his face a mask of horror, exposed, naked, and guilty in the glare of 1,000 pairs of eyes. The video ended. The screen went black. For a moment, there was absolute silence, a silence so profound it felt like the end of the world. And then, the chaos erupted. People were shouting, screaming, standing on their chairs. The media in the front row surged toward the stage, their cameras flashing like machine guns. Sheriff Brody, his face ashen, made a move to flee, but it was too late. Two men in dark suits, state troopers who had been pre-briefed by Maria's team and were waiting in the wings, stepped forward. They flanked Brody, their movements swift and professional. "Dale Brody," one of them said, his voice cutting through the din. "You're under arrest for aggravated kidnapping, tampering with evidence, and official oppression." They wrenched his arms behind his back and clamped handcuffs on his wrists. The sound of the click was amplified by the microphone on the podium. A sharp, metallic sound of justice that echoed through the entire room. The man who had put Leo in chains was now in chains himself. His face a mask of disbelief and ruin. As they led Brody away, a path parting through the screaming crowd, all eyes turned to James Abernathy. He stood alone on the stage, a king whose castle had just been turned to dust. He opened his mouth to speak, to deny, to lie, but no words came out. The evidence was absolute. His guilt laid bare for the entire world to see. His career was over. His power was gone. He was just a man, a criminal, trapped in the spotlight of his own making. In the back of the room, Maya watched, her face impassive. She felt no joy, no triumph, just a vast, empty, quiet sense of release. She felt Sarah's hand squeeze hers, and she looked down at the terrified young woman who had been the key to it all. Sarah was still crying, but for the first time, her tears were not of fear, but of relief. Ben Carter put a hand on Maya's shoulder. "It's over," he said softly. Maya nodded, her eyes fixed on the chaotic scene. It wasn't over, but it was the beginning of the end. The monster had been dragged into the light, and now it was time to go and bring her brother home. The aftermath was not a clean, neat resolution. It was a slow, messy, and painful process of healing and rebuilding. The rescue of Leo was a quiet, somber affair. State police, armed with the information from the video and a warrant signed by a federal judge, descended on the Culberson County Jail. They found Leo in his cell, a pale, malnourished shadow of the man he had been. When Maya walked in, he simply stared at her, his eyes hollow. He didn't cry, he didn't speak. He just reached out a trembling hand and touched her face, as if to confirm she was real. The long, silent embrace they shared in that cold, grey corridor was a testament to a bond that had been tested by hell and had not broken. The legal and political fallout was a firestorm. The Abernathy Brody scandal became a national story, a symbol of small-town corruption and the abuse of power. James Abernathy was indicted on a dozen federal charges, his empire crumbling under the weight of his own hubris. Sheriff Brody, facing a life sentence, took a plea deal, agreeing to testify against Abernathy and uncovering a web of corruption that had poisoned Culberson County for decades. Other victims came forward, emboldened by Leo's case, telling stories of shakedowns, planted evidence, and stolen lives. The town was forced to look at its own reflection, to confront the monster it had allowed to grow in its midst. For Leo, the road back was long and arduous. Freedom was not a switch that could be flipped. The world felt too loud, too bright, too fast. He suffered from panic attacks, from nightmares that sent him screaming back to the grey walls of his cell. He couldn't be in small rooms. The sound of a siren would make him seize up in terror. The man who had loved the clean lines and logical structures of architecture now lived in a world that felt chaotic, random, and unsafe. He moved in with Maya, into the small apartment that had been her war room, and she became his anchor, his protector, his patient guide back to the world of the living. Sarah, the girl from the gas station, became an unlikely part of their new, broken family. She had testified before the grand jury, her voice shaking but clear, her testimony the final nail in Brody's coffin. The state had put her in witness protection, but when the trials were over, she had nowhere to go. Her father, terrified of the fallout, had disowned her. She had lost her job, her home, her town. Maya, without a second thought, had invited her to stay with them. The three of them, the victim, the warrior, and the witness, formed a strange, silent trinity, bound together by a shared trauma. The final scene of the story did not take place in a courtroom or a press conference. It took place a year later, on a cool autumn afternoon, at a quiet, windswept cemetery. They were not in Culberson County, but in Oakhaven. They stood before a simple granite headstone. Eleanor Martinez, beloved mother. She had passed away 6 months after Leo's rescue, her flickering candle finally extinguished. Leo had been by her side, holding her hand, but he never knew if, in her final moments, she had recognized the haunted face of the son who had come home so late. Leo placed a small bouquet of wildflowers on the grave. He was still thin, his eyes still held a shadow of the darkness he had endured, but there was a new stillness about him. The frantic, hunted look was gone, replaced by a deep, weary calm. He had started sketching again, not buildings, but landscapes, empty plains under wide open skies. He was trying to reclaim the horizon that had been stolen from him. Maya stood beside him, her arm linked through his. She was the same, yet different. The fire in her was still there, but it was banked now, a steady, warming flame, rather than a raging inferno. She had found her purpose in the fight for her brother. And now, in the quiet aftermath, she was learning to find peace. Sarah stood a little ways behind them, giving them their space. She was enrolled in a community college, studying to be a paralegal. She wanted to help people like Ben Carter, to fight for the voiceless. The fear was still there, a faint scar on her soul, but it was overshadowed by a quiet strength she never knew she possessed. As they turned to leave, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grass. There were no grand speeches, no declarations of victory. The cost had been too high. A man's soul had been scarred. A mother had died waiting for her son. A young woman had lost her home. But they had survived. They had found the truth in the darkness. They had held on to each other. Back in Maya's apartment, sitting on a bookshelf between volumes on constitutional law and art history, was a small black plastic rectangle, the dashcam. It was unplugged, its memory card wiped clean, its purpose served. It was just an object now, a piece of cheap plastic. But sometimes, when the light hit it just right, it seemed to hold a faint, lingering echo of a lonely road, a raging storm. And the moment a quiet man's life was shattered and a sister's love refused to let it be swept away, it was a silent, haunting reminder of the price of justice and the terrible, beautiful strength of the human heart.